James Taylor has written some of the greatest guitar songs in our lifetime. This is Millworker, which is, it's kind of different from a lot of his songs. It uses an interesting picking technique, not as difficult as some of his. It's a little bit more regular in spots, but it has his usual, sometimes alternating bass, sometimes a little random, and uses a really interesting musical technique known as pedal point, where he keeps the same bass note, I'm in drop D tuning, keeps the same bass note over some chord changes. So we hear a D chord, we hear an A chord with D in the bass, and we hear a G chord with D in the bass. And then we get into his usual stuff. When I say that, some of the chord progressions he uses in tons of his songs. And a nice little lick in the beginning. Anyway, we're going to take a look at all of that in this lesson. It's a pretty simple tune. It's got a verse, 4 verses, and a chorus. The chorus is sung with a couple of different melodies. The subject matter of the song is fascinating. You know, through the eyes of a woman in the early 1800s, maybe, who made some bad choices and is real unhappy with her life. And so it goes. Now, the song was originally written as part of a Broadway musical called Working, of all things. And then James Taylor put it on his album in 1979, Flag. So anyway, if you're familiar with the tune, you already know how cool it is. If you're not, go listen to it. There are a lot of live versions, and he does some things a little bit differently. So I had a little trouble trying to decide, okay, well, what do I want to show every little nuance that he does in each live version? Figured, no, let's just stay with the basic stuff, mostly what we hear on the studio album, but I'll talk a little bit about some of the variations that happen. Actually, I'll talk about those as it evolves. So coming up, a lesson on Millworker by James Taylor. Well, I think the approach I'm going to take with this song is just kind of working through the parts kind of independently. The intro, which is played twice and also used as the outro, and the second intro and the outro are slightly different, but would be a really good place to start because it's a steady alternating bass thing. I mean, again, I'm in drop D tuning, so I want to play a D chord, but I'm going to keep my bass alternating between the 6th and 4th strings. Then I'm just going to be picking out notes here from a D chord. And if you take a look at the tab, the first measure starts with, and pretty much every measure, we're going to have a few little variations where not 4 beats are in a measure, and we're going to have a little bit of strumming going on in some of the other, as we get into the chorus. But in the very beginning of the song, we have our D chord, and here's what happens. Now that little 2-measure phrase is a little tricky from a hammer-on point of view. The first measure is pretty straightforward. It's a pinch with the open 3rd string and the bass note, hammering on to the and of 1, coming in with the 2nd bass note on 2, the F sharp on the and of 2, the 3rd bass note on 3, the 2nd string on the and of 3, and the 4th bass note on beat 4, the open D, the open higher D, and it ends with an open G. Now if I just play that measure and stop, it's going to sound terrible, especially if I mess up the hammer-on. Because that open G is creating some tension and dissonance because it's not part of the chord. But what happens is it carries over into the next measure, and then it gets hammered onto the same beat that it did before, the and of 1. The verses of the song are really just running through 3 chords, D, A, and G. Except I only need to play the top 3 strings of each of those chords because I'm going to be playing the low D and the bass for all of them. So when we're playing our D chord, it'll be our standard D. We'll play the D and the bass, the 6th string open. When we get to the A chord, now James plays his D chords and his A chords in a slightly unorthodox way. I guess I could venture to say even unusual. But what I recommend is play the D chord probably the way you normally do, with your first finger on the 3rd string, 2nd on the 1st, and 3rd finger on the 3rd string. Then when it goes to the A chord, we don't even need the 4 notes of an A chord, the 3 fingers you have to put down for an A chord. So just leave your first finger where it is and move your 2nd finger to C sharp. And we're only playing those 3 notes and keeping the low D in the bass. And then for our G with D in the bass, we're going to come up and play the top 3 strings of what would be a full bar G chord out of the E family. So I need a bar across the third fret, at the first and second strings, and a B on the 4th fret of the 3rd string. So there we have the chords, D, A, and G. And we have the bass pattern where we're hitting a bass note on the 4th beat of each measure preceding the chord change. So if we take a look at the last 2 measures of the intro, we would hit our D chord on beat 1, 1, 2, 3, bass note on 4, and the chord on 1, 2, 3, and another bass note on 4, and that bass note, pretty much we never play a bass note on 1 except at the beginning of verse 2 again, because we're coming out of a different chord. Yes, verse 2 and verse 4. But verses 1 and 3 always have a bass note ringing before you hit the first chord, and so what we're going to do is hit a bass note on 4 and then grab our A chord with D in the bass. Kind of unusual that the first verse starts on the A with D in the bass and the second verse starts with a D chord. Reason for that is because in the intro he finished up with his D chord, and so when he goes into the first line, "My grandfather was a mill worker," so it starts off a little bit unusually in that the first chord is not our D chord, it's an A with D in the bass.